Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's web interface support call. This presentation will be followed by a Q&A session where attendees will have an opportunity to ask questions via the phone or by typing into the Q&A box. And CMS subject matter experts will address as many questions as time allows. Also to note, a recording of the slide deck from today's call will be posted on the QPP webinar library within the next 2 weeks. Now I'll turn it over to Sandra Adams-Slaughter at CMS to begin. Sandra?
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as ACOs prepare for quality reporting. I'm Sandra Adams-Slaughter from CMS. Joining me on the call today are other CMS experts and contractors who will share helpful information on CMS web interface quality reporting and answer your questions following today's presentation. Today's call is the final 2023 CMS web interface support call, and we will only focus on quality reporting. You can contact the Quality Payment Program Service Center with any of your questions regarding cost, promoting interoperability, improvement activities, MIPS, or other quality reporting questions you may have through the end of the submission period. Today's slide deck recording and transcript will be available on the QPP resource library within the next 2 weeks. Next slide, please. Information in this presentation is current at the time it is published, but I urge you to please be sure that you're using the source documents and links that are provided throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. And now for some announcements and reminders. Next slide, please. The CMS web interface will close at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on April 1st, 2024. Your submission will be automatically accepted at submission close. As a reminder, the CMS web interface is accessible using the sign-in link on the Quality Payment Program website shown here. Next slide, please. The CMS web interface application program interface, or API, is available all year for testing in the developer preview environment. Please review the links listed here for more information. Next slide, please. And this is a slide for other CMS approved reasons. Please remember to submit your request for an other CMS approved reason as soon as possible. Requests submitted after Monday, March 25th, 2024 may not be processed prior to the close of submission. Submitting your request during the last days of the submission period could cause your request to not be processed. For more information on how to submit and other CMS approved reason request, please review page 45 of the 2023 CMS Web Interface User Guide. And now Carrie Burrows will review CMS Web Interface reports.
Thank you, Sandra. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, good morning, good afternoon, Carrie Barrows, and today I'm here to talk to you about the available reports in the web interface. This first set of reports that you see on the slide here are always available. You can see a report name and description. We'll go through each one briefly. The data confirmation is essentially a receipt that you have submitted data into the web interface. It provides information about when and who, and it is available to you at all times. The second report is the measure rates. This allows you to see an in-depth breakdown of your progress on each of the measures in the current performance period. Activity log is just exactly that. It's a list of activity that has happened in the web interface related to your ACO, SSP ACO. Next slide, please. There are a couple of reports that are conditional, meaning that they're only available based on a set of conditions being met. They are the following: skip requests and data irregularities. The skip request report requires that you have actually submitted skip requests in order to be able to see it. That is the condition for this report. This report will allow you to track the progress and outcomes of any requests that your organization has made to skip a patient. The data irregularities report is conditional on having data irregularities in your submitted information. The data irregularities report identifies irregularities at the measure level, when a measure has been reported with a 0 denominator due to skips and/or denominator exceptions, and at the patient level, when inconsistent data is reported within the measure, or measure data is reported for a patient who isn't qualified for the sample or the measure. Next slide, please. So how do you access the reports? You can access the reports by using the left navigation and clicking on the View Reports option. Once you do that, you'll see the always available reports, and if conditions are met, you'll see the conditional reports as well. Please note that activity log isn't available for download or printing. You'll know if something is available for download or printing because you will see the word download to the left of the button with the download icon. You can access data irregularities and measured rates by clicking on the View Progress. Next slide, please. To access the 2023 CMS Web Interface User Guide that you'll hear mentioned throughout presentations, you can go to the resource library, or you can go within the CMS Web Interface application proper to the View Progress tab on the left navigation bar, and then select the CMS Web Interface User Guide from the View Progress web page. So there's a link, and you'll see it in that image at the bottom of the image. You'll see that there's a link there that will bring you to the CMS Web Interface User Guide. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentation on available reports within the web interface. And at this time, I will pass it back to Katie Moore.
Thank you, Carrie. Next, we'll review some frequently asked measure questions. Next slide, please. The first measure that we'll be reviewing today is CARE2, Falls, Screening for Future Fall Risk. The intent of this measure is to screen patients 65 years of age and older for future fall risk. In regard to use of telehealth, a screening for future fall risk may be completed during a telehealth encounter. Next slide, please. Okay, question 1 is who can perform the screening for future fall risk for the 2023 CARE2 measure? The response is that the measure isn't limited to a particular clinician type. The quality action can be completed by anyone the organization considers qualified. Question 2, is documentation of an inpatient or emergency department fall screening acceptable for the 2023 CARE2 measure? The answer is yes, the measure isn't limited to a particular setting. Question 3, what documentation needs to be captured for the measure for non-ambulatory patients to be excluded from the 2023 CARE2 measure? The response is that non-ambulatory patients aren't excluded from the measure. The expectation is that a fall screening is completed during the measurement period for each patient qualified for the measure. Next slide, please. Question 4, what clinical information should the medical record reflect to meet the intent of CARE2? Screening for future fall risk is an assessment of whether an individual has experienced a fall or problems with gait or balance. This specific screening tool isn't required for this measure. However, potential screening tools include the Morse Fall Scale and the Timed Get Up and Go test. For numerator compliance, documentation of no falls is sufficient. Medical record must include documentation of screening performed. Any history of falls screening during the measurement period is acceptable as meeting the intent of the measure. A gait or balance assessment meets the intent of the measure. If after reviewing the medical record you find supporting documentation that meets the guidance criteria, then it would meet the intent of the measure. Next slide, please. All right, next we will be reviewing MH1 depression remission at 12 months. The intent is for patients with major depression or dysthymia who reached remission 12 months plus or minus 60 days after an index event. Documentation of a follow-up PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M result less than 5 can be determined using a telehealth encounter. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of frequently asked questions, we'll start with question 1. For 2023 MH1 depression remission at 12 months, a PHQ-9 has been completed for the patient on paper and scanned into the medical record, but the score isn't totaled. Is it acceptable to calculate the score during abstraction? The response is no. If the score isn't totaled in the medical record documentation, you must select no when asked if the patient had one or more PHQ-9s or PHQ-9Ms administered during the denominator identification period. Documentation of a follow-up PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M with a score less than 5 is also required to determine if the patient achieved remission for the numerator. Question 2. If a patient answers the first 2 questions of the PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M not at all and leaves the rest of the questions blank, is the depression screening considered numerator compliant? The answer is no. All 9 questions must be answered to have a valid summary score for follow-up PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M. The medical record documentation of the score and date completed. Question 3, since the age range for the 2023 MH1 measure is 12 to 17 years old and 18 years and older, can we use the PHQ-9 for all patients? The answer is yes, you may use either the PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M tool to meet the intent of the MH1 measure. Question 4, can the PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M be performed during inpatient encounters, or should it only be performed during outpatient encounters? The response is that the 2023 MH1 measure specification doesn't limit the PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M screening to a specific setting. Next slide, please. Question 5, can you please clarify the timing used to identify denominator exclusions? For denominator exclusions that require specific diagnosis, the diagnosis must be active any time prior to the end of the patient's measure assessment period. The index event date marks the start of the measure assessment period for each patient, which is 14 months, or 12 months plus or minus 60 days. Patients who were permanent nursing home residents any time during the denominator identification period or the patient's measure assessment period are excluded. Question 6, can you explain how to determine the index event date? You must first verify the patient has an active diagnosis of major depression or dysthymia during the denominator identification period. Then look for the date for the first instance of a PHQ-9 or PHQ-9M greater than 9 during the same period where the diagnosis is also present, which would be the index event date. We recommend referring to the step-by-step submission guidance and measure confirmation flow in the 2023 CMS web interface MH1 measure specification. Next slide, please. Question 7 is, why was place of service exclusion POS 12 home included in the 2023 MH1 coding document denominator exclusion codes tab? The response is, effective January 1st, 2023, the American Medical Association made significant changes to the CPT coding for evaluation and management services. The codes for E&M in the home setting were combined with codes for E&M services in a domiciliary rest home. The measure exclusion associated with these codes is specific to patients who are permanent nursing home residents anytime during the denominator identification period or the measure assessment period. However, as part of the 2023 CPT updates, the AMA repurposed the domiciliary and rest home CPT codes to represent both home and domiciliary rest home settings. To maintain the setting associated with the denominator exclusion for MH1, the affected CPT codes, an exclusion of POS 12 home was added to prevent the home setting from being excluded. Question 8. How should the changes to column G within the 2023 MH1 coding document denominator exclusions tab be implemented? The response is that when mapping to an EHR, column G was added to identify a place of service exclusion at the coding level. The CPT codes listed here are exclusion codes, except in cases where place of service home equals Y. If you aren't mapping to an EHR, the CPT codes can be used to identify encounters that may be applicable for the denominator exclusion when present without place of service 12. CPT codes with place of service 12 home should not be excluded from the measure. Next slide, please. Okay, that brings us to the end of our measure FAQs, and I will turn things back over to Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. These next few slides will outline the available CMS web interface resources. Next slide, please. Please note that the 2023 submission resources are available on the Quality Payment Program Resource Library. We encourage you to review these documents if you have questions on quality requirements and measures. The recording, slides, and transcripts from the first CMS web interface support calls are now available on the QPP webinar library. Next slide, please. Again, as a reminder, today is the final 2023 CMS web interface support call. If you need assistance prior to the end of the submission period on April 1st, 2024, please refer to the contact information listed on the next slide. Next slide, please. There you go. And now I will hand it over to Haley to begin the Q&A session.
Thanks, Sandra. We're now going to start the Q&A portion of the webinar. You can ask questions via the Q&A box or through the webinar audio. To ask a question via the webinar audio, please raise your hand and we will unmute your line so that you can speak. To submit a question anonymously via the Q&A box, please click Send Anonymously. Otherwise, all attendees will be able to view your question. We currently only have one question in the Q&A box, and that question is for Carol. Carol, the question reads, if there is I-10 in 2022 and it's not active January 1, 2023 to June 30th, 2023, but shows up as active again, for example, August 1, 2023, can this be used to confirm the diagnosis? The response I keep getting is based on the guidance within the specification in order to confirm denominator eligibility for the 2023 HTN2 measure. Medical record documentation should support the patient has an active diagnosis of essential hypertension starting before and continuing into or starting during the first 6 months of 2024. It is not necessary for your patient to have a visit in the first 6 months of the year if you are able to confirm based on the medical record the patient has a continuation of the essential hypertension diagnosis that carried into 2024. I don't understand why they are saying 2024 when nothing from 2023 can be used for PY 2023 reporting. Carol?
Yes, thank you. This is Carol. Thanks for that question. So we can't necessarily speak specifically to your question. However, if you have documentation that supports that there's an active diagnosis and it's either on the problem list or it's a diagnosis code or description on that encounter or within 6 months of the measurement period starting or anytime prior to the measurement period, continuing into that year, your measurement year, hope that makes sense. Then you could confirm the diagnosis of hypertension. If you can't confirm continuation, then I suppose you wouldn't confirm diagnosis of hypertension. That's it, thanks.
Thanks, Carol. Our next question's for Carrie. Carrie, the question reads, will the submission portal accept multiple Excel files? Will later files overwrite previously submitted results?
Thank you. Yes, so you can submit one Excel file at a time. You can resubmit a file multiple times. Only the data you have specifically entered into the Excel template will be overwritten within the system. Any fields left blank will not be overwritten. Any fields for which not applicable is selected will be specifically overwritten with an empty value in the CMS web interface, and only select not applicable if you want the system to overwrite a field with a blank value. Of course, with Prev 7, just as a reminder, you cannot change a value other than no encounter to the value of no encounter, and you cannot change a value of no encounter to any other value. That is the one caveat to this response.
Thank you, Carrie. The next few questions we have are for Deb. Deb, the first question is asking, is a memory care unit the same as a nursing home?
Thank you. So I'm going to answer this maybe a little bit vaguely. I am assuming the question is being asked in regard to the MH1 measure as it came in when Katie was kind of going over the MH1 frequently asked questions. And so what I can say in regard to this is that the best thing for you to do is to go ahead and look at the coding document to see if your medical record documentation supports what is included in the coding document. We cannot specifically give you an answer, mainly because we don't understand the entire context of what you are asking, but would definitely refer you to the coding document to see if you can support the nursing home exclusion for MH1, if that happens to be the question and measure you're asking about. If not, please either provide some additional clarification within the Q&A, or you're always welcome to open up a ServiceNow help desk question and we can answer it in that manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. The next question we have for you is, for Prev 7, if a patient is not sampled for the 2023-2024 flu season and they are a denominator exception for 2022-2023, why is it considered a not met for 2023 performance year? Apologies, I think there may have been a typo in the question, and please confirm that it should read 2023.
Yeah, no problem. And I think the bottom line is if you have someone that was not sampled for one of the flu seasons and they were sampled for the other flu season and you have a denominator exception for the other flu season, that is considered a denominator exception, not a performance not met. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. The next question we have for you is, if a patient is sampled in both flu populations and declined a flu shot in one flu season, does that also count for the other population?
No, you need to have medical record documentation that supports either receipt or a denominator exception for each of the flu seasons that the patient was sampled.
Great. And Deb, the next question for you. Are you able to confirm the time period in which exceptions for the PREV7 measure can be documented? Does a valid exception need to be documented within the medical record during the time of the coinciding flu period or during the time of the denominator eligible encounter? Thanks.
So the medical record documentation should support that it is specific to the flu season being reported.
Thank you. The next question is actually for Katie. Katie, this question reads, are there specific diagnosis or CPT codes that should be documented to show findings of depression for the PREV12 measure?
Hi, thank you for this question. So while we can't tell you specifically how to document, there is recommendation for what should be documented within the measure specification. This would be found on page 6 of the PREV12 measure specification. So the measure requires documentation that a screening was conducted with a standardized depression screening tool. It's recommended that both a score and the clinician interpretation of the score is documented, especially when the patient screens positive. At a minimum, the medical record documentation must contain documentation of the tool's name and the result of the screening with a score or clinician interpretation of positive or negative for depression. And just to note that coding alone isn't considered sufficient documentation when reporting via the web interface. Your medical record documentation has to support the information reported, so simply using coding would not be sufficient. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Our next question's for Carol. Carol, the question reads, if we have documentation that only states hypertension, but we can see the encounter was billed as essential hypertension, could we use a combination of the office note and the mention of a code from a billing system to meet the intent of the HTN diagnosis?
As long as you are using, wait, excuse me, hi, this is Carol. So the coding document lists a code for essential hypertension, just a single code. You can use a combination of the coding, the progress note indicating that the patient has a diagnosis or is being treated for hypertension, or if it's listed on the problem list, then you can confirm the diagnosis of hypertension.
Thanks, Carol. And just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute your line to ask over the phone, or you're more than welcome to enter your question into the Q&A box. Moving along though, our next question's for Deb. If a patient is being assessed by CMS for 2 flu seasons, are they excluded from the measure if they've only had a vaccine during one of those seasons?
No. So if the patient has been sampled into both flu seasons, you would want to respond to whatever the outcome is for each of those individual flu seasons. If they're only sampled into a single flu season, then you will be scored against just that single flu season. But if they're sampled into both, you want to be able to answer for both flu seasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. It looks like we have a question on the line from Erica. Erica, we have unmuted your line if you would like to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on a question that I asked in the chat regarding the hypertension diagnosis. Carol, thank you for your answer. I just have a few additional questions here. So if our progress note or the problem list solely documents just general hypertension, there's no primary or essential attached to it, but we can see in the claim that was billed for that visit that it was actually essential hypertension that was coded, would we be able to use some combination of the progress note from that date of service along with some documentation from the billing system to prove that it was essential?
Hi, yes, that sounds like the perfect example of of how to confirm the diagnosis of
Okay,
hypertension.
wonderful. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that discussion. We have another question on the line from Ruslan. Ruslan, we have unmuted your line if you'd like to unmute yourself.
This is a follow-up question from a previous question. If the patient is being assessed by CMS for 2 flu seasons, are they excluded from the measure if they only had a vaccine during one of those? I'm noticing that in that case, the patients are being removed from the numerator.
Okay, I think I might understand what you're asking. Let me see if I can. This is Deb. So if they've been attributed to both flu seasons and they have receipt of a vaccine in one flu season and no receipt of a vaccine or a denominator exception for the second flu season, then that is considered a performance not met.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Deb, our next question's for you again. If CMS has pre-filled an answer incorrectly for flu vaccine, can we override the no with a yes?
And this is another one, Carrie may have to back me up here. If the patient has a no encounter filled, as Carrie said earlier, you cannot change that. However, if a no is pre-filled, then the expectation is you're looking for what occurred during that flu season, whether it is receipt of the vaccine, a denominator exception, or you can leave it as no if you can't find documentation of either of those. There's no reason for you to change a yes to a no. Because a yes just basically says that CMS was able to find not only the encounter, but the vaccine as well. And there is no expectation for anything additional in those cases. Hopefully that answered your question. If not, please feel free to either resubmit in the Q&A or open up a help desk ticket. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Carol, our next question's for you. If a clinician documents diagnosis of high blood pressure with the blood pressure reading and date, is the documentation considered numerator compliant for the HTN2 measure?
So for numerator compliance, this is Carol again. You will need to have the most recent blood pressure documented and the date of the blood pressure being taken within the measurement period.
Thanks, Carol. Our next question is for Katie. Katie, for MH1, if there is a past diagnosis in the chart for bipolar or any other denominator exclusion, but it is not listed during the denominator identification period, are they still excluded?
Hi, thank you for the question. So in terms of the timing for the denominator exclusion, there must be an active diagnosis of bipolar, personality disorder, schizophrenia, psychotic disorder, or pervasive developmental disorder, or personality disorder, emotionally labile, any time prior to the end of the measure assessment period. Patients who are permanent nursing home resident any time during the denominator identification period or the measure assessment period would also be denominator exclusions. So if there's any history, that alone wouldn't necessarily be an exclusion. Your documentation would need to support that the condition was being treated or managed during the denominator identification period through the end of the measure assessment period for that particular patient. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Our next question's for Carrie. I'm getting Excel errors for data accidentally entered into a black cell for an unranked patient in the measure. I went back and changed to NA, and the file I downloaded from QPP with data have blank cells, but I still have the Excel errors showing on the QPP. Do these Excel errors need to be corrected for my submission to count?
So generally speaking, you don't have to correct the error that is in the Excel error that's in the application. I would be curious, though, to know what the error is telling you. So if you could share that information in the Q&A or in the chat, that would be wonderful. And I can try to answer more completely with that information. But again, in general, it's not something that's going to hold up your submission if you don't correct them.
Thanks, Carrie. Our next question's for you as well. We have attested to all of our patients. Is there a specific process for submitting, or are we done since all of our patients are attested for?
So if you've gone through the process of uploading your file and everything has been taken care of through that process or within the web interface proper, you can check the data confirmation report. Again, that's a receipt of the web interface confirming that they have received the data, gives you a timestamp and information in that report. Additionally, if you weren't to make any more changes between now and April 1st, whatever exists in the system as of April 1st, when web interface closes, is what will be submitted automatically for you for scoring and further processing.
Thanks, Carrie. Our next question's for Carol. The question reads, for HTN measure, does a chart documentation need to specifically state that BP was taken remotely by electronic monitoring device?
Okay, so for this one, the guidance section within the hypertension measure specification provides a little additional information related to this. So I'm just going to read from that. In reference to the numerator element, only blood pressure readings performed by a clinician or a remote monitoring device are acceptable for numerator compliance with this measure. This includes blood pressures taken in person by a clinician and blood pressures measured remotely by electronic monitoring device capable of transmitting the blood pressure data to the clinician. Blood pressure readings taken by a remote monitoring device and conveyed by the patient to the clinician are also acceptable. It is the clinician's responsibility and discretion to confirm the remote monitoring device used to obtain the blood pressure is considered acceptable and reliable, and whether the blood pressure reading is considered accurate before documenting it in the patient's medical record. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Our next question's for Kara. Kara, the question reads, regarding disqualification reason, would non-fee-for-service Medicare apply if a beneficiary had a non-fee-for-service Medicare for a full year or partial year?
Yes, this is Kara with the ACO POS team. The answer is yes. If the patient has primary coverage that is not Medicare fee-for-service coverage at any time during the measurement period, then it would be appropriate to skip that patient. Thank you.
Thanks, Kara. Our next question is for Carrie. We are having problems with date values being errored out during submission, although it is in the correct format. Is there a specific format when submitting the field? It is regarding when the patient became disqualified for this measure.
So for this one, that field is a little bit particular. So you must have the forward slashes if you don't have them. And it also requires that you enter a date between 1/1/2023 and 12/31/2023. And if the date is unknown, you need to enter 12/31/2023. So if you're trying to enter just the numbers with no forward slashes, that will be problematic. If you're trying to enter a date that is not within those date ranges, that will also result in an error. If you are doing everything as expected and still encountering an error, please submit a case through the service center.
Thanks, Carrie. Our next question's for Deb. How is the flu measure scored?
Okay, so I'm going to go over one part of it, and if anyone else from the team wants to provide some additional information as applicable, please feel free to do so. So obviously, if the patient has been attributed for a single flu season, you'll be scored on that single flu season. If the patient has been attributed to both, if you have a patient that has received a vaccine during both seasons, that is a performance met. If you have a patient that has receipt during one flu season and a denominator exception during the other, it is considered a performance met. If both flu seasons are documented with a denominator exception, it's considered a denominator exception. If you have a patient that has a denominator exception and no receipt of the flu vaccine, it's a performance not met, and I may double check myself, but I believe that is in a previous slide deck, that is performance not met. Obviously, 2 flu seasons with no vaccine or performance not met, and a flu vaccine during one season and no flu vaccine during the other flu season is also a performance not met. If you need additional follow-up, please feel free to open up a ServiceNow help desk case, and we will be able to get that information to you in writing. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Carol, our next question's for you. For the hypertension metric, if the documentation in the record is I-10 hypertension, is that sufficient since I-10 is in the coding document, or does it have to specify essential?
Okay. So the ICD-10 code within the coding document is the only coding for the I-10 or found within that document, but it encompasses many different essential hypertension in there as well. However, this code is not attributed to other conditions like heart and kidney disease. Coding alone is not sufficient documentation. And I see there's another question kind of related to that, so this is answering that as well. You would also need medical record documentation to support the information you are reporting. The measure requires that you confirm the essential hypertension using a combination of written documentation and an applicable code. That's it.
Thank you, Carol. Our next question's for Katie. For MH1, does a diagnosis of recurrent major depressive disorder in full remission the question just disappeared. We're going to move on to a question from Deb, or for Deb, excuse me. For Prev 7, if it shows no encounter, yet a flu vaccine in progress note are found, what happens as it is met and we cannot change no encounters?
So since you cannot change a no encounter, which is really no different than not being able to add patients that were not included in your sample, you will be basically you'll be scored on the results of a single flu season. So if you have a no encounter during one, you will likely have an encounter during the other flu season where the patient has been attributed. So just answer the questions based on the results of that flu season, and that is how you'll be scored. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Katie, the question for you from earlier was, for MH1, does a diagnosis of recurrent major depressive disorder in full remission qualify as an active diagnosis of major depression during November 1, 2021 to October 31st, 2022?
Hi, thank you for this question. So the first step we would recommend is to review the denominator exclusions codes within the MH1 coding document to see if the diagnosis you've mentioned is listed as an applicable denominator exclusion. And then from there, we would just point you to the definition of active diagnosis of major depression or dysthymia, which is defined as a diagnosis that's either on the patient's problem list or a diagnosis code description listed on the encounter, or is documented in a progress note indicating the patient is being treated or managed for the disease or condition during the denominator identification period. So step one is to confirm that the diagnosis is contained within the coding documents for denominator exclusion. And then step two is to confirm that it was active during the denominator identification period. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Just another reminder to please enter any questions you may have in the Q&A box or raise your hand to ask the question over the phone and we'll unmute your line. Katie, our next question is also for you. Regarding MH1, if the PHQ-9 shows a score in the note example, PHQ-9 equals 4, do the questions need to be shown in the note or can the PHQ-9 score be enough?
Hi, so we can't tell you specifically how to document within the medical record. However, we can point you to what is outlined for documentation within the measure specification. So for MH1, the note is that all 9 questions must be answered to have a valid summary score. If the patient chooses more than one response for a single question, select the worst response or the higher number to calculate the summary score. So just to reiterate, how specifically that's documented in your medical record is up to your organization, but you must be able to support that all 9 questions were answered and you have a valid summary score. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Deb, our next question's for you. If a patient declines a flu immunization between August 1, 2022 and December 31st, 2022, can that be considered an exception for the flu measure or flu season October 2022 through March 2023?
So what I can basically tell you is as long as your medical record documentation supports that the patient declined or received a vaccine during the flu season being asked about, it would be sufficient. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. The next question's also for you. So for one flu season with the vaccine received and another season having no encounter, would this patient be selected for a single flu season?
Yes, that is what that indicates. So if you have no encounter pre-filled for one of the 2 flu seasons, you are just being measured basically on the single flu season in which the patient was attributed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Carrie, our next question's for you. The question is a follow-up for the question about dates from earlier. It is only with patients with months and days less than 10 or double-digit month and days that we are seeing the error of the date not being read.
Yeah, and so in that scenario, you need to put a 0 in front of the single digit. So for example, it would be 01/01/2023. That should fix the error condition.
Thank you, Carrie. That takes us to the end of our question queue. Would just like to take a moment to give folks a chance to enter any questions they may not have had time to enter during the rest of the webinar, or go ahead and raise your hand and we will call on you to ask your question over the line. We do have another question in the queue for Sandra. Sandra, the question asks for Prev 7, significant changes in methodology, but no change in benchmarks. What is the source of the benchmark data for this modified measure?
Thank you, Haley, and thank you for this question. In the calendar year 2023 Medicare Physician Fee Schedule Final Rule, we finalized the proposal to designate a performance benchmark and minimum attainment level for each of the CMS web interface measures, and to establish a point scale for the measure for performance years 2022, 2023, and 2024. Also, we finalized the proposal to set benchmarks using flat percentages for the 8 CMS web interface measures that are scored. Note that Quality ID 438, statin therapy for prevention and treatment of cardiovascular disease, and Quality ID 370, depression remission at 12 months, are not scored and do not have a benchmark. However, ACOs are required to report these measures to complete the CMS web interface reporting data set. And lastly, the use of flat percentages allows ACOs with high scores to earn maximum or near maximum achievement points while allowing room for improvement and rewarding the improvement of ACOs with lower scores so that they are not penalized as low performers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. We will do another call to see if any more questions come through the queue or if anyone else would like to raise their hand to ask a question over the phone. All right, seeing no further questions, that's going to conclude the Q&A portion of the webinar. So I'll turn it back over to Sandra Adams-Slaughter to conclude the call. Sandra?
Thank you, Haley. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, the slide deck recording and transcript from today's call will be available on the Quality Payment Program Resource Library in the next 2 weeks.